Happiness does not exist. Or rather, it exists only as the absence of pain. You never feel that you are healthy. You feel the tooth that aches. You do not notice that everything is fine. You notice the one thing that went wrong. That is all a man calls his life. One philosopher said this to the face of the 19th century, and Europe first pretended not to hear. Then it read his book to pieces. His name was Arthur Schopenhauer, the gloomiest thinker of his time, who seriously argued that our world had better not exist at all. And here is the paradox that still gives me chills. Fame came to him not through his main work on will and representation, which he wrestled with all his life, but through a small collection of practical advice on living this unbearable life as tolerably as possible. The most famous pessimist on the planet became known through his most optimistic text. The book is called Aphorisms on the Wisdom of Life, and honestly, I have not met a text that explains so harshly and so precisely why some people with millions in the bank howl with boredom, while others with an empty wallet smile quietly out of the window. Schopenhauer does not explain it beautifully. He explains it like a surgeon tired of pitying the patient. For the next half hour, we go through the whole book. 3 things that make up any human fate. 2 enemies your life swings between. 53 rules for surviving among people. And what he wrote about old age, the most unexpected passage in the book. Brace yourself. In places this stings. Subscribe so you never miss the books that actually change how you think. No filler, half an hour each. First, 2 words about the man, because without them, the text does not read. Schopenhauer was born into a wealthy merchant family. His father left him a solid inheritance, and this is one of the most important details of his life. At 21, Arthur received his share and never had to earn a living again. Never. He could live not off philosophy, but for it. So when he later writes that an independent income is an underrated blessing, he speaks from his own skin. With his mother he quarreled forever. She was a fashionable writer with a literary salon, and a son of his character did not fit into it. With the academic world, it went the same way. At the University of Berlin, he deliberately scheduled his lectures at the same hour as Hegel, who then thundered across Germany. More than 200 listeners came to Hegel. Fewer than 5 signed up for Schopenhauer. Fewer than 5. He folded up his teaching and went off to write. And only in 1851, when he was past 60, do the aphorisms appear. What he had waited 40 years for finally happens. The book becomes a household name across reading Europe. Intellectuals admire his style, his cruel wit, his nerve. People travel to see him. People write to him. The fame he never chased arrived 10 years after he stopped waiting. He predicted this himself in this very book. Fame runs from those who seek it and follows those who scorn it. In the preface, he warns the reader honestly. From the standpoint of my real philosophy, he says, happiness is impossible. The question is closed. But now I step down from that height and tell you how to live a life as little unhappy as possible. He even coined a word for it, eudaimonology, the science of happiness, and added at once that the word itself is only a polite substitute for the truth. With that warning begins the most useful book ever written by the most hopeless man of the 19th century. Schopenhauer begins with a simple question. What does the difference between human fates depend on? Why does one man live as if in paradise, while another, in the same circumstances, lives as if in hell? Everything that makes our life what it is, he answers, comes down to 3 points. First, what a man is. Personality in the widest sense. Health, strength, beauty, temperament, character, intellect, and its cultivation. Second, what a man has. Property, money, possessions of every kind. Third, what a man represents. That is, how he looks inside other people's heads. This is honor, rank, and fame. Then comes the move for which the whole book is worth reading. The first point matters more than the other 2 combined, and not slightly, but incomparably. The first difference was drawn between people by nature herself. The second and third were invented by men. Set against a great mind and a great heart, all advantages of birth, rank, and wealth are what stage kings are to real ones. Look how he explains it. Each of us is locked inside his own consciousness as tightly as inside his own skin, and lives only there. On stage, one plays a prince, another a counselor, a third a soldier. The differences are enormous, but only outside. Inside each sits the same poor actor with his worry and want. Life is the same. Rank and money hand out roles, but the inner difference in happiness does not follow them. Hence, a simple and rather frightening conclusion. The same event happening to two different people is two different events. The melancholic sees tragedy where a calm man sees an interesting turn, and the phlegmatic notices nothing. All reality, says Schopenhauer, consists of two halves, object and subject, bound as inseparably as hydrogen and oxygen in water. If the objective half is magnificent and the subjective one dull, the sum is still wretched. Like a beautiful landscape in bad weather. Here is the example that hits hardest. When we envy a man to whom something remarkable happened, we should envy not the event, but his capacity to understand it. The same story is a whole novel for a gifted mind, and an empty daily incident for a flat one. All the luxury reflected in the dull consciousness of a fool is poorer than the consciousness of Cervantes writing Don Quixote in prison. And this is what struck me most. The objective part of our life belongs to fate, and is therefore changeable. The subjective part is ourselves, and in its essentials, it does not change. Fate may turn for the better, but a fool stays a fool to the end of his days, even if he lands in paradise. No one can step outside his own individuality, hence the rule he repeats through the whole book. It is wiser to invest in health and in your abilities than in piling up money. And he specifies at once so as not to be misread. This is not about neglecting a decent income. It is that a large surplus adds almost nothing to happiness. Many rich people are unhappy precisely because they have no knowledge, no interests, no inner work. He sees around him people as industrious as ants, busy from morning to night multiplying wealth they already have. Outside the narrow circle of means needed for that, they know nothing. And at the end of life, if they were lucky, they have a very large heap of money before them, which they leave to their heirs. And this whole road, says Schopenhauer, for all its serious expression, is exactly as foolish as the road of a man in a fool's cap. Now to the most practical part of the book. If personality matters more than everything else, then what matters most within that personality? Schopenhauer's answer is unexpectedly simple. A cheerful disposition. Not intellect, not talent, not character, cheerfulness of spirit. The logic runs like this. It is the only quality that rewards itself instantly. Whoever is cheerful already has a reason to be cheerful, that he is. Nothing else can replace it, while it can replace almost anything. Let a man be young, handsome, rich, and respected. One question remains. Is he cheerful through all of it? And the reverse. If he is cheerful, it no longer matters whether he is young or old, poor or rich. He is happy. Schopenhauer recalls a naive line he read in some old book in his youth. He who laughs much is happy. He who weeps much is unhappy. The line stayed with him forever. For all its banality, it is true. Hence advice that sounds surprisingly modern. Throw the doors wide open to cheerfulness whenever it comes. It never comes at a bad moment. We usually hesitate. We want to be sure we have grounds to be glad, or we fear joy will disturb our important cares. And whether anything comes of those cares is unknown. Cheerfulness is a direct profit right now. It is, he says, the only ready coin of happiness. Everything else is banknotes. And what produces cheerfulness? Here he is honest to the point of rudeness, not wealth. Wealth, he says, is one of the least favorable conditions for a cheerful spirit. Look at the faces of working people and at the faces of the rich and titled. Cheerfulness is produced by health. Then comes the line that has long lived apart from the book. 9/10 of our happiness depends on health alone. With it, everything becomes a source of pleasure. Without it, no external good gives joy, and the qualities of mind, heart, and character are diminished by sickness. Hence, the greatest of all follies is to sacrifice health for anything: gain, rank, learning, fame. Everything must yield to it. A healthy beggar is happier than a sick king. He even gives a regimen, and for a man writing almost 2 centuries ago, it sounds absurdly familiar. Avoid excess and violent agitation. Do not overstrain the head. Every day, at least 2 hours of brisk movement in the open air. His explanation is beautiful. Inside the organism, everything moves without pause. The heart, the lungs, the glands, even the brain, with every beat of the pulse. And when outward movement is almost absent, as with the huge number of people who live seated, a ruinous mismatch appears between outer stillness and inner tumult. Even trees, he says, need wind in order to grow well. I remember that when I was reading this book, it was exactly here that I put it down and went for a walk, simply because I felt embarrassed. Write in the comments what turned out to matter more in your own life, what you have or the mood you wake up with. I am genuinely curious how that splits. Here begins what is probably the most famous thought in the book. Human happiness, says Schopenhauer, has exactly two enemies, pain and boredom. And here is the cruel part. The further you move from one, the closer you come to the other. Human life is an oscillation between them, a pendulum. And this pendulum swings in two dimensions at once. Outwardly, it is simple. Need and privation lead to suffering. Security and abundance lead to boredom. So ordinary people fight need all their lives, while the rich and titled wage a constant, often desperate war against boredom. But there is an inner dimension, and it is more interesting. Susceptibility to pain and to boredom stand in inverse relation. Dullness of mind almost always comes with dullness of feeling. Such a man is harder to wound. But that same dullness produces the inner emptiness, which is the real source of boredom. Emptiness craves outside stimulation and is undiscriminating about it, hence pitiful amusements, empty talk, and the eternal idlers at the windows. A man with a rich inner world suffers from the opposite. A strong mind rests on heightened sensitivity, which means every experience is sharper, every obstacle more tormenting. He hardly knows boredom and knows far more pain. And everyone, says Schopenhauer, instinctively defends himself against the enemy he is more sensitive to. The inwardly rich man chooses a quiet existence free of alarms and often seeks solitude. The more you have inside, the less you need outside. The inwardly empty man, on the contrary, chases company at any price, and there is nothing he avoids so carefully as himself. He gives this a name, the Philistine, a man without intellectual needs. Not evil and not stupid in the everyday sense, he simply has no need that money or the body cannot satisfy. The summit of his existence is oysters and champagne. And it is fortunate, says Schopenhauer, if that aim gives him plenty of work, because once the goods are ready, he falls into the power of boredom. And against it everything is deployed: balls, theaters, cards, horses, wine, travel. And all of it proves powerless. Right there he explains the well-known thing, why heirs run through fortunes so quickly. Because the young man came into the world rich on the outside and poor within. And so he tries in vain to replace inner wealth with outer, wanting to receive everything from outside. Thus, inner poverty ends by producing outer poverty as well. And here is the main conclusion of this passage. Leisure is the fruit and the profit of a whole human life, because only in free time does a man possess himself. But to most people, leisure gives nothing except a heavy fellow they have absolutely nothing to do with. The ordinary man thinks about how to pass the time. The man with talent thinks about how to use it. Has it ever happened to you that after a long-awaited vacation, you feel not lighter but sadder? Schopenhauer would explain it in one sentence. The absence of real work tears a man out of his natural element. But that is not all. We move to the second point, to what a man has. And here Schopenhauer says things that every psychologist repeats today, only in other words. He starts from Epicurus, who divided needs into three classes: natural and necessary, food and clothing, easily satisfied. Natural but not necessary, the needs of the body. And third, luxury, brilliance, splendor, which have no limits and are almost impossible to satisfy. Then the main formula. Contentment depends not on how much a man has, but on the relation between his claims and his possessions. Property in itself means as little as the numerator of a fraction without its denominator. A man feels no deprivation over goods it never occurred to him to claim. Another, with 100 times more, feels wretched because he lacks the one thing his desire is fixed on. Everyone, says Schopenhauer, has his own horizon of what is attainable for him. His claims reach exactly that far. The huge fortune of a rich man is not an object of longing for a poor one. It is simply beyond the horizon. And the rich man, if his plans have failed, finds no comfort in all the much he already owns. Hence his famous line, "Wealth is like seawater. The more you drink of it, the thirstier you become." And the same is true of fame. Then he explains a very subtle thing. When we lose money, after the first minutes of grief, our mood returns almost to what it was, because along with our property, we cut down our needs to the same degree. That operation is where the real suffering of misfortune lies, and once it is complete, the wound has healed. Why do people love money in particular? Schopenhauer defends them from an unexpected side. Every other good satisfies one need only: bread for the hungry, medicine for the sick, a fur coat for winter. Money alone is an absolute good because it answers not one need, but need in general. Money is a tireless Proteus, ready to turn into any object of our changing desires. But he advises looking at property in a particular way. It is not permission to buy pleasures, it is offense against possible calamities. And then his advice to those who earn by talent. Such people almost always imagine that their gift is untouchable capital, and its income is the interest, and they spend exactly what they receive. Then the talent dries up, or the circumstances change, and the man is left with nothing. What talent earns, says Schopenhauer, is itself the capital, not the interest on it, and the most honest passage of the chapter. To have from the very start the means to live in real independence, without the necessity of working, is, in his words, an inestimable advantage. It means being released from the universal drudgery that is the natural lot of mortals. Only then is a man truly master of his own time and can say every morning, "This day is mine." Now the third point, what a man represents. And here Schopenhauer is utterly merciless. We attach far too much weight to this side of life, he says, although even a shallow reflection shows that in itself, it is inessential to happiness. He is amazed at how strangely a man is built. With the same unfailingness with which a cat purrs when stroked, bliss spreads over the face of anyone praised, even when the praise is an obvious lie. And the reverse, it is astonishing how deeply a man is wounded by any neglect. Yet what we are for others lives inside someone else's head. For us, it does not exist directly. It affects us only through other people's behavior. And we stop overrating it once we get properly acquainted with the shallowness of human judgment. It is especially instructive, he says, to hear half a dozen thick-headed gentlemen speak with contempt of the very greatest men. And here is his main formula on the subject. Every man lives first of all in his own skin, not in the opinion of others. Our real condition, health, character, abilities, income, home, the people close to us, is 100 times more important than what others care to make of us. To show how far this mania goes, he cites a case from the newspaper, the execution of a journeyman who had murdered his master. In the morning the chaplain came, but the condemned man paid no attention to his words. The only thing that occupied him was cutting a fine figure before the spectators of his shameful end. And he managed it. He climbed the scaffold steps unaided, bowed left and right, and the crowd answered with a roar of approval. A man with death in its most terrible form before him and eternity behind it thinks only of the impression he makes on gawking onlookers. And Schopenhauer adds coldly, in such extreme cases, we see our own reflection. The object of our cares and anxieties is in most cases tied to exactly the same thing and is exactly as absurd. He also separates pride and vanity, and the distinction is elegant. Pride is an already settled inner conviction of one's own worth. Vanity is the attempt to plant that conviction in others in the secret hope that it will come back to you. That is why vanity makes a man talkative and pride makes him silent. And then his most poisonous stroke. The cheapest kind of pride is national pride, because whoever is possessed by it reveals that he has no personal qualities to be proud of. Otherwise, why would he clutch at what he shares with millions? The man with real merits, by contrast, sees the faults of his own nation more clearly than anyone because they are always before his eyes. What does enrage him is so-called knightly honor, the dueling code. The logic is simple. Real honor depends on what a man does himself. Knightly honor hangs on the tongue of any passerby. Let some idler abuse you, and it is supposedly lost. Hence the monstrous conclusion Schopenhauer sets down with evident relish to show the whole absurdity. As far as being abused is a disgrace, so far abusing another is an honor. Whoever is ruder is always right. And fame. It is won either by deeds or by works, and the difference is that deeds pass while works remain. Of Alexander the Great, a name and a memory survive, while Plato and Homer go on existing themselves. And here is the conclusion this was all for. What is valuable is not fame, but that by which fame is earned. Fame is only a reflection, and light is invisible until some body reflects it. Here begins the second part of the book, the part still quarried for quotations today, 53 rules. And above them all stands one, which Schopenhauer calls the highest rule of all worldly wisdom. He takes it from Aristotle, and it goes, "The sensible man seeks freedom from suffering, not what gives pleasure." The grounds you already know. Pleasure is negative, suffering is positive. So whoever sums up his life should count not the joys he enjoyed, but the calamities he escaped. The fool chases pleasures and arrives at disappointment. The wise man tries to avoid misfortunes. Hence, a counterintuitive piece of advice. Never buy a pleasure at the price of suffering, or even of its possibility. You are paying with the real for the chimerical. But sacrificing a pleasure in order to avoid suffering is always a profitable trade. And his formula about foundations. Do not build the happiness of your life on a broad base by making many demands of it. Here, everything is the opposite of ordinary buildings. The broader the foundation, the more easily it collapses, because more openings for failure appear. The surest means of not being very unhappy is not to demand great happiness. Beside it stands his rule about time, to my mind, the most humane thing in the book. Some live only in the present, the frivolous. Others are absorbed in the future, the anxious. The second kind he compares to donkeys, led forward by a bundle of hay hung from a stick tied to their own heads. The animal sees it constantly and hopes to seize it. Such a man robs himself of his whole existence because he lives provisionally until he dies. And then he says something that makes your skin crawl. We live through our best days without noticing them. Thousands of bright hours pass us by while we wear a gloomy face, so that later, in hard times, we can sigh for them in vain longing. Today comes only once, and every day is a small life. Waking is a small birth, mourning is a small youth, falling asleep is a small death. Hence the advice about imagination. Do not build castles in the air, you will have to tear them down. But forbid yourself even more strictly to paint pictures of possible misfortunes, especially in the evening. In the evening, reason weakens while imagination keeps working, and night lays its black color over everything. In the morning, these horrors vanish like dreams. Serious matters should be thought through in the morning. Morning is the youth of the day. And one more rule, simple to the point of genius. Looking at what belongs to another, we think, what if this were mine? And we feel deprived. Instead, we should ask, what if this ceased to be mine? Look at what you own as though you were remembering it after the loss. Because most often, it is loss that first reveals to us the value of things. But that is not all, because next comes the most debated part, the part about people. Schopenhauer did not like society and did not hide it. A man can be entirely himself only while he is alone. Whoever does not love solitude does not love freedom either, because we are free only in our own company. Compulsion is the inseparable companion of any society, and its sacrifices weigh the heavier the brighter your individuality. He calls things by their names. In ordinary company, clever speech is met with something close to hatred, because success there requires being flat. A man has to submit to a hard self-denial, giving up 3/4 of himself to resemble the others. But notice the important qualification. The love of solitude, he says, is not innate. A child left alone for a couple of minutes raises a cry of despair. For a boy, solitude is a punishment. A young man occasionally begins to seek it, For a mature man, it is easy, and an old man finds in solitude his native element. So this is not misanthropy, but the result of experience. And here his famous image appears. Society is like a fire. The clever man warms himself at a sensible distance, while the fool walks straight into the flames, and then, burnt, runs off into the cold of solitude, and complains that fire burns. Hence his advice to those who have not learned to be alone: take part of your solitude with you into company. Do not lay out your thoughts at once. Do not weigh what others say too heavily. Do not expect much from people. About politeness, he speaks with unexpected warmth. Politeness is intelligence, and rudeness is stupidity. To make enemies without need is as insane as setting fire to your own house. And then the image I have remembered ever since. As a little warmth is enough to make wax soft and ready to take any shape, so a little politeness makes quarrelsome and spiteful people yielding. Politeness is to a man what warmth is to wax. About character he is harsh and without illusions. Character is incorrigible, because all actions flow from an inner principle. So if someone close to you has caused you an injury, the question is only this: are you prepared to endure the same thing again and to a greater degree? If yes, keep silent and bear it. If no, part at once and forever. Words will not help here. And a rule worth memorizing whole: it is in small things, when a man is not watching himself, that character shows. If someone behaves without ceremony in trifles, pursuing his advantage at another's expense, be sure that in serious matters, he will do the same as soon as law and force stop binding his hands. And in the same place, if a man boasts of his courage, learning, intellect, or wealth, it is precisely there that he is short. Whoever really possesses a quality does not shout about it. And now the last part of the book, the one Schopenhauer himself put in an appendix, and which many consider the best thing he ever wrote, on the difference between the ages of life. In childhood, he says, we are far more knowing beings than willing ones. Needs are few, the will is almost silent, and nearly all our being goes into knowing. The world is still new, every small thing shines with novelty, and childhood is unbroken poetry. And here is his formula, which still unsettles me. All things are beautiful to look at and terrible to be. A child sees only the first side. Youth is ruined by something else, the firm certainty that happiness exists somewhere and one need only find where. Hence, endlessly disappointed hope and dissatisfaction with any position whatever. The young man expects his life to run like an interesting novel, and then experience arrives, and its first task is to free us from the illusions rooted in youth. And here comes the turn nobody expects from the chief pessimist of Europe. Old age, he says, is happier. People think the opposite, and that would be true if happiness were brought by the passions. But the passions torment a young man, giving little joy and much torture, while cold old age they leave in peace, and knowledge steps into first place. He cites Plato, who called old age happy precisely because a man is at last free of the appetite that troubled him without pause. The cheerfulness of old age is that of one released from a long chain, hence his famous images. In youth, life is seen like stage scenery from far away. In old age, like the same scenery close up. In the first half of life, we see the embroidery from the front, in the second from the back. The back is less pretty but more instructive, because you can see how the threads are connected. The first 40 years give the text, the next 30 the commentary on it. And at the end of life, everything happens as at the end of a masquerade. The masks come off, and it becomes clear who those people beside us really were. He also explains the most galling thing in the world, why time flies faster with the years. The cause is memory. In childhood, everything is new and reaches consciousness, so a child's day is endlessly long. With age, perception is polished smooth. Everything slides past without a trace. Days grow poorer and therefore shorter. A child's hours are longer than an old man's days. And he left one very precise observation about longing for places. Sometimes it seems to us that we passionately want to go back somewhere far away. In truth, we long for the time we lived there. We were younger and fresher then. Time deceives us, wearing the mask of space. And we shall be sure of that deception if we go. We read, you save hours. If you want more breakdowns like this, support the channel. Thank you for watching. So what, in the end, did the gloomiest philosopher of Europe say? Strip away all the venom, and one very simple thing remains. No one can give you what you have inside. Not money, not rank, not the approval of others. All of that is a fence, not a home. The home is what you are yourself, and in that home you will spend every day of your life, whatever you own and whatever people think of you. He wrote this in complete solitude, without students and without fame, at an age when most people expect nothing anymore. And he turned out to be right, only 40 years later. Subscribe if you want books like this to come to you on their own. Burning books is a crime, but not reading them is worse. We fix that in half an hour. Subscribe.